Welcome to Drive the Daf. Clear, structured explanation of the daily Daf in 20 minutes. You can even follow in the car.
Yoma Daf Yud Gimel discusses the appointment of a substitute wife for the Kohen Gadol. So to ensure that he has one wife for Yom Kippur, the Gemara will explore the machlokes between the Rabbanan and Rabbi Yehuda as to whether we're concerned for that. Then the Gemara will discuss exactly how the arrangement of the second wife worked, to what extent she was married, to what extent she was divorced, to what extent she was appointed. The Gemara will try to compare that to a couple of other drashas and bring up another sugya related. So first of all, we see the machlokes between Rabbi Yehuda and the Chachamim as to whether we needed to be concerned that his wife was going to die or not. Rabbi Yehuda had said we do have to be concerned, therefore we have to appoint a substitute wife, because the Kohen Gadol has to have a wife in order to be able to do the avoda of Yom HaKippurim. The Chacham said if you're concerned that the wife is going to die, so then maybe the appointed wife will also die, then there's no end to it. You have to be concerned that everybody will die and you have to keep appointing substitute to the substitutes and substitutes to that. So the Gemara says, what does this machlokes work over here? So the Gemara says that the Rabbanan are obviously not concerned that anybody is going to die. We said that Misa is far-fetched. It's not so much happens often. You don't have to be concerned. You do have to be concerned that it'll become Tameh, and therefore you do have to appoint a substitute for the Kohen Gadol himself, lest he become Tameh. But that his wife is going to die, you don't have to appoint a substitute for that. So Gemara says, what is Rabbi Yehuda going to say? He says that you do have to be concerned that somebody will die, but why isn't he concerned that you have to appoint a substitute for the substitute? So he says, one death is common, two deaths is not so common. Well, the Gemara then says, well then how do the Chachamim explain why we're only concerned for one tumah and not for two tumahs? If the Chachamim say, look, if you're concerned for one, you have to be concerned for two. And therefore, if you're concerned for one death, you have to be concerned for two deaths. So how do they understand why we're concerned for one tumah of the Kohen Gadol himself becoming tamei, but we're not concerned that the Kohen and a substitute will become tamei, and then therefore we should appoint a substitute to the substitute, let's say they all become tamei. So my answer is, the Rabbanan will tell you like this, that somebody will die is not in your hands. There's nothing you can do about it. And therefore, we're not concerned about it. And if you are concerned about it, then you have to be concerned forever. However, something which you can control to a certain extent, you could be careful and avoid it, tumah, so we're not concerned that tumah will happen because the Kohanim are zrizim, the Kohen Gadol will be careful, make sure he doesn't become tamei. The says he won't become tamei, so why do you even need one substitute? So Gemara says, because by appointing a substitute, you'll make even more sure that the Kohen Gadol will be careful, because he knows that there is somebody who's waiting to take his place, and therefore he'll be careful not to become tamei even more so that he shouldn't lose the job to this other person who he sees looking over his shoulder and breathing down his neck, waiting to take over the job. The Gemara now asks, how does the substitute wife work? How does she fulfill the role? Now, there's going to be two requirements that need to be fulfilled. First of all, she has to be a beisoy. She has to count as his wife. And you can't have more than one beisoy. It says, V'chipur ba'adoy v'ad beisoy. The Kohen Gadol has to have a beisoy. He has to have a wife. That means not two and not zero. So there has to be exactly only one. So what does this wife do? Now, the Gemara goes through about 9 possibilities here as to how this works. Rashi explains that the Gemara doesn't really seriously consider all of them. The Gemara is just working through them step by step to show how we arrived at the final conclusion as to how it has to work. But on each step there are many problems. The Gemara is not going to ask all of them. So first of all, the Gemara says if she's just appointed, that doesn't solve the problem because they're not married. He has to have a wife. So the Gemara says, so he's Mekadesher. That means that they become a betrothed. The Gemara says betrothing doesn't work either. It says Beso. Beso means somebody who he's actually married to. So the Gemara says, so he marries her. The Gemara says, but then he has 2 wives, and the Beso is supposed to be only 1 wife. The Gemara says, so he divorces her. The Gemara says, divorces her. He's back to the problem. He doesn't have he doesn't have a backup wife. He only has 1. If the original wife will die, it won't solve the issue. So the Gemara says, okay, so obviously he has to divorce her with a Tanai. And now the Gemara has to try to figure out how this Tanai is going to work. There's a condition of some sort. Just to keep in mind what our concerns are, either wife we have to be concerned may die, at least according to Rabbi Yehuda. We don't have to be concerned that both wives will die. That's, we said, is already too far-fetched. But either wife could die, or they could both remain alive. So we have to figure out a way that Kohen Gadol is guaranteed to have 1 wife throughout the Yom Kippur Avoda, keeping in mind that either one may die or neither of them may die. So the Gemara's first possibility is that he gives the second wife a get, he divorces her, and the get is on condition that she dies. And therefore it says as follows: if you die at some point during the day, you're divorced already from the beginning of the day. If it turns out that she dies, therefore she was never married to him in the first place, the get took effect from the beginning of the day, and the original wife was the only wife that there was altogether. So the Gemara says that doesn't solve the problem. That solves the problem of there being a second wife for half the day. But what if she never dies? That means that she didn't have a get, because the get was conditional on her. It only took effect on condition that she dies. Then if nobody dies, if she doesn't die, then he had two wives for the entire Yom Kippur, and that doesn't qualify. Gemara therefore says no. Okay, so what actually happens is that he gives her a get on the condition that she stays alive. If she dies, there's no get. If she's alive, then she's divorced. Therefore, either way, she doesn't account. Either she's divorced or she's dead. The Gemara says, well, that doesn't solve the problem at all. That means she has no effect on the entire thing. What do we need her for? You just have the other wife. If the other one will die also, if the other one will die and this one will stay alive, so that won't solve the issue. The other one has died, this one is alive, but she's divorced. So what's the point? You end up with 0 wives. So Gemara says, okay, so here's what happens. He gives the second wife a get, and he says that the get takes effect on condition that one of you will die. That way, if she dies, she's divorced and she's only married to the other wife. If the other wife dies, then she is divorced also. So the Gemara says, lots of problems here. First of all, if neither of them will die, then the get doesn't take effect at all. He ends up being married to 2 wives. Second of all, you can't have a get that's dependent on something that takes your entire lifetime. This is a rule in Hilchos Gittin, that if a man gives his wife a get and says you're divorced on the condition that, let's say, you won't drink wine for your entire life, that's not called divorce, because she's never free from him. Her entire life she's bound by his rules. A get has to totally separate her from him at some point that she has no more connection to him. Here, the rest of her life she has connections to him. And therefore that doesn't count as get. If he would say, look, here's your get on condition that somebody else won't drink wine, alright, so at least she's not stuck to him, it's dependent on the other guy. But if her life is bound to him for the rest of her life, that doesn't count as a get. So then he says, alright, so here's what we're going to do, and here's our next suggestion. We say we're going to give the second wife a get on the condition that the first wife is alive. That way, if the first wife is alive, this one's divorced, he's married only to the first wife. If the first wife dies, then this get is void, he's married only to the second wife. Solves all the problems. He's married to either one and not the other. The Gemara says it doesn't solve all the problems, because what if the first wife will die halfway through the Yom Kippur Avoda? What comes out? Comes out that the first wife did not live. The condition of the get was not fulfilled. The get is canceled, and the second wife is never divorced. But the first wife was still married to him for the first half of the day. So for the first half of the day, he had 2 wives. Then when the first wife died, midway through the day, he had only 1. But the get never took effect. And then for the first half of the day, he had 2 wives. The first half of the Avoda, he had 2 wives, and it's no good. So Gemara says, okay, so let's try it this way. He gives her a get on the condition that the other wife will die. If the other wife dies, then she is divorced. If the other wife stays alive, then she's not divorced. That doesn't solve anything. Now, if the other wife will die, and her get will take effect, then he's not married to any wife. He doesn't have anyone. The first one died, and the second one was divorced with the get. So the Gemara says, okay, so here's what we have to do. It doesn't work to have one get. He has to give them both a get with conditions. And here's what he will do. He'll give the second one a get and say, here's your get on the condition that the first wife remains alive. That way, if one of that, we have only one. Either the first one's alive and this one's divorced, or the first one is dead and this one is not divorced, because her get is canceled by the fact that the other one remains alive. We had a problem. What if she dies in the middle of the day? So he gives that first wife a get as well. And he says that this get takes effect on condition that you walk into shul. Therefore, if she doesn't die and she lives out the day, so she just has to cancel her get. And that way she's the only wife the whole time. She lived, so the second wife's get takes effect, and the second wife is divorced from the beginning of the day. She didn't count at all. If the first wife is married the whole time. If, however, the first wife dies in the middle of the day, so then the first wife never fulfills the condition of walking into shul. So that means that the first wife never takes off the get that she had, and she ends up being divorced all along. the only way to cancel the get is for the first wife to walk into shul. So what the first wife will do is near the end of the day, she'll walk into shul, cancel her own divorce. As long as she's alive, that's fine. And then she was the wife the whole time. If she dies, then her get will take effect, and therefore she was never married the entire time. And the second wife, her get is canceled because her get was contingent on the first wife being alive the entire time. So that solves all the problems. So Gemara says that solves all the problems, except if she doesn't listen and she doesn't walk into shul. And then she forgets, or she does not cancel her own get, and she ends up being divorced, and then he has no wives. So the Gemara says, so therefore he has to make the condition on himself, not on her. And he says, here's your get. Again, the second wife he gives a get conditional on the first wife being alive. That way, if the first wife is alive, the second wife is divorced. The problem is that the first wife also has a divorce on her, but that's conditional on the Kohen Gadol himself walking into shul. So if he sees that his wife dies, his first wife dies, he has to make sure that she was divorced all along, in order that she be divorced the entire day. And the fact that she died cancels the get of the second wife, and she was never divorced, and she was his wife the whole day. He'll make it his business to walk into shul if he sees his wife is about to die, the first wife, or after she dies. The Gemara doesn't say that, but even after she dies, theoretically, the Rishonim say he should be able to walk in shul at that point, and then he's canceled her. He has made her get effective by walking into shul, and the fact that she died means that the other one's get was canceled, and he was married only to the second wife. And that is the Gemara's conclusion. That is how the entire structure of this works. That way we know for sure that he's going to have one wife and only one wife throughout the Yom Kippur service. Okay, now the Gemara has a couple of questions here. The Gemara says, based on what you said, that when the Torah says Chibur Badai Bad Beisai, Beisai means that he has to have one wife, and that his wife, not two, and that his wife has to be married to him. It's not enough if she's Mekudesh, if she's just engaged. So Gemara says, you're telling me that the word bias means one and not two, and engaged, and married and not engaged. But the problem is that in the Parsha of Yevama, where the Torah talks about the mitzvah of Yibum, where a woman dies without children, the Torah uses the word bias there. So that means that this woman who's falling to Yibum, which means that her husband died and now she's marrying his brother, this mitzvah only applies if there's something that qualifies as a bias. According to what you're defining a bias, that means that it has to be that there's only one wife and that she's married, not engaged. But we see that neither halacha is true. Yibum applies even if there were two wives to the dead guy, and if they were engaged and not married. If they were mekudesh and not actual nesuit. So Gemara says, because there's an extra pasuk for each of those. The word Yevimtai appears twice in the pasuk of Yevama, and by Yachbet Ish Lakacha says Yevimtai, but also Yevimtai Hashara. Extra word Yevimtai is to include even if there's two wives, and the extra word Hachutza that's in the psukim is to include even if they're only engaged and not actually, even if they're only mekudesh and not actually nesu and not actually married. Okay, the Gemara now moves on to bring a brisa, which will circle back around to the discussion of the substitute wife. The brisa is about, is a Kohen Gadol allowed to do avoda if he's an onein? If somebody has lost a close relative before the burial, he's counted as an onein, he's in a state of mourning. Similar to what happened to Aaron HaKohen at the time of the Chanukas HaMishkan, where he lost his two sons, Nadav and Avihu. They died. So the question is a Kohen Gadol allowed to do avoda when he's an onin? Now we know that a Kohen Hedid is not allowed to do avoda. The question is a Kohen Gadol allowed to do avoda as an onin? So the Gemara says it's a machlokas between Tanakama and Rabbi Yehuda. The Tanakama says he's allowed to do avoda, he just can't eat from any of the karbanos. Eating a kachim as an onin is level that you're for sure not allowed to do. Avoda you're allowed to do. Rabbi Yehuda says a cryptic phrase. He says kol hayom, all day. What does it mean all day? What's he trying to say? So Rava has two possibilities. Rava's first suggestion, which will be rejected, Rava's first suggestion is we bring him from his house and we tell him do the avodah all day. Not only is he allowed to do it, we want him to do it. It's a mitzvah for him to do it. We want him to overlook his pain. We want him to be distracted from his pain, from his mourning. We go pull him out of his house and we say go do the whole avodah the whole day. Gemara says, what are you telling me? That Rabbi Yehuda is more into the Kohen Gadol doing avodah when he's an onin than the Chachamim are? He prefers avoda in aninas. He's more in favor of avoda of an onen than the chachamim are. But if you look at the halach of a kohen hedyot, a regular kohen, you see that the inverse is true. Over there, the halach is that Rabbi Yehuda says that if a kohen hedyot becomes an onen, you kick him out. You send him out of the avoda, even in the middle. And Rabbi Yossi, who represents the chachamim, say no, he's at least allowed to finish the job. So you see that Rabbi Yehuda is more into sending people away. He says you can't do avoda as an onen. So how can you say that by the kohen gadol? He says you even take him from his house and say come do it. So Rava therefore offers a different possibility, and he says no. When Rabbi Yehuda says kol hayom, is that he shouldn't do the avoda the entire day at all. Even though the halacha is that the kohen gadol is allowed to do avoda, we don't want him to because we have gzeira d'Rabbanan, and we're afraid that if we have him doing avoda, he's going to end up eating from the kachim. He's going to end up eating from the karbanos, and that he's not allowed to do. So therefore, as gzeira d'Rabbanan, Rabbi Yehuda says let him not do avoda at all. So he's stricter, just like he's by kohen hedyot. He's stricter on the rules. He's stricter by kohen gadol, and his mid'Rabbanan he shouldn't do avoda. So Gemara says, Rav Ava asks, how can you tell me that the kohen gadol can't do avoda if he's an onen? We have this whole discussion as to what he's going to do if his wife dies. How are we going to replace his wife? But why don't we say you can't do the avoda? You're an onen. You lost your wife. So Gemara says, what do you mean? The whole reason he can't do avoda is because we're afraid he's going to eat from the karbanos. On Yom Kippur, he's not going to eat from the karbanos. Everybody's fasting on Yom Kippur. Of course, he's not going to eat from the karbanos on Yom Kippur. That's not an issue at all. So the Gemara now asks, but hold on a second. Your question was based on the assumption he's going to be an onen if his wife dies. Didn't we just say his wife will be divorced? There's a whole strategy. He'll walk into shul, and then from the beginning of the day, his wife was divorced all along, so she wasn't an onen altogether. The Gemara says, yeah, he's technically not an onen because he's technically divorced, but the halacha about the kohen gadol not doing avoda, not eating, has nothing to do with the technicalities of hilchos onen. It has to do with him being in an upset state because he lost his wife, and he definitely did lose his wife, even though they perform a technical.
Drive the Daf is a project of the Grand Woodlands Shul and is presented by Rabbi Yitzchak Landa. Find us on YouTube or subscribe to daily emails by emailing drivethedaf@gmail.com.